The moment the transport doors sighed open and the heat rolled in, Jonah Hale felt the world tilt in a way that had nothing to do with gravity. Dust carried the smell of metal and unfamiliar spices, and banners snapped above the landing field in colors his mind had no words for yet. He had trained himself to catalog threats, angles, and exits, but none of that mattered when she stepped into view across the parade ground. Her posture was calm, deliberate, as if the chaos of soldiers forming ranks behind her were merely weather passing overhead. Jonah's breath caught without permission, a physical betrayal that startled him more than enemy fire ever had. He told himself it was shock, exhaustion, the cumulative strain of first contact made flesh. Even as the lie formed, his eyes refused to look away. She was not human, not even close, yet the familiarity of her presence struck him harder than the alienness. Her skin carried a pale warmth under the sun, and her eyes held a clarity that felt focused rather than predatory. Every step she took sent subtle ripples through the assembled ranks, as if command itself followed her movement. Jonah had seen leaders before, humans who wore authority like armor, but this was different, quieter. It felt less like being observed and more like being understood before a word was spoken. His pulse betrayed him again, thudding hard enough that he wondered if his suit sensors would flag it. Across the distance, her gaze lifted and found his. The contact lasted a heartbeat, maybe two, but something passed between them that made the air feel charged. Jonah's training screamed at him to break eye contact, to remain neutral, unreadable, professional. Instead, his chest warmed, a slow spreading certainty that unsettled him more than fear ever had. Her expression did not change, yet he felt seen in a way that stripped him of practiced defenses. Behind her, the alien soldiers halted in perfect unison, boots grinding against packed earth. The sound echoed like punctuation to the moment, sharp and final. She inclined her head, a gesture that felt deliberate, and his fate shifted with it. The briefing that followed blurred at the edges for Jonah, words flowing past without anchoring. He registered the cadence of translation drones, the formal welcome, the careful balance of diplomacy and warning. What he could not ignore was the way her attention flicked to him whenever emotion stirred in the crowd. It was subtle, almost polite, yet every time it happened his stomach tightened. He realized with a jolt that she was tracking him specifically, not as a threat, but as a variable. The thought should have alarmed him, yet a strange calm settled instead. Whatever this was, it had already begun. When the assembly dispersed, Jonah expected to be escorted back to the human delegation quarters. Instead, an aide approached with precise steps and a respectful stillness that radiated practiced discipline. The translator rendered the message gently, almost apologetically, informing Jonah he had been requested elsewhere. No explanation followed, just an expectation of compliance that carried the weight of command. Jonah glanced toward his commanding officer, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Diplomacy demanded trust, even when instincts urged caution. He followed without protest, every step echoing louder than it should have. The corridor they entered was cooler, walls etched with patterns that shifted as he passed. Light flowed instead of flickered, responding to motion in a way that felt alive. Jonah's boots sounded too heavy here, a reminder of his own blunt solidity. At the end of the passage, doors parted soundlessly, revealing a chamber open to the sky. She stood there alone, hands clasped behind her back, the horizon framed over her shoulders. No guards, no weapons visible, only a presence that filled the space effortlessly. Jonah stopped at the threshold, uncertain for the first time in years. She turned before he spoke, as if she had sensed his hesitation ripple through the air. Up close, the differences were more pronounced, yet none of them diminished the pull he felt. Her eyes held layers of color that shifted with the light, unreadable but intent. "You felt it," she said through the translator, voice steady and unadorned. It was not a question, and that fact struck him harder than any accusation. Jonah swallowed, suddenly aware of how exposed he was, emotionally unarmored. "Yes," he admitted, honesty rising before caution could stop it. A pause followed, not awkward, but thoughtful, as if she were weighing something delicate. "In my people," she said, "such a reaction is not hidden. It is acknowledged." Jonah's mind raced, searching for diplomatic phrasing, for distance, for safety. Instead, curiosity edged out fear, and he found himself standing straighter. "I didn't mean to offend," he said, the words feeling inadequate even as he spoke them. Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something close enough to unsettle him. "You did not," she replied. She stepped closer, stopping just outside what his instincts labeled personal space. Jonah became acutely aware of his own breathing, the way his heart refused to slow. "For us, perception is a responsibility," she continued, eyes never leaving his. "When I saw you, I saw intent without deceit. That is rare." The admission sent a tremor through him, part pride, part fear of being misjudged. Humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of concealment, especially from themselves. Jonah wondered what she saw that he had never named. Silence stretched, comfortable yet charged, the sky above shifting toward evening hues. Jonah realized he was standing at the edge of something vast and undefined. This was not just first contact between species, but between ways of being. He felt the weight of humanity's history pressing against his back, urging caution. At the same time, a quiet conviction whispered that trust, once offered, could reshape outcomes. He met her gaze again, choosing openness over retreat. Whatever followed would change him, and perhaps more than just him. "Then we begin with truth," she said, as if reading the decision in his posture. Her hand extended, palm open in a gesture that needed no translation. Jonah hesitated only a moment before placing his hand in hers, warmth meeting warmth. The contact was simple, human in its vulnerability, alien in its consequence. He felt a subtle shift, as if unseen currents aligned around them. Outside the chamber, two civilizations waited, unaware of how much hinged on this meeting. Inside, something fragile and powerful took its first breath. The warmth of her hand lingered even after she released him, as if contact had imprinted itself beneath Jonah Hale's skin. He became aware of the chamber again, the open sky dimming toward amber while distant sounds of the encampment softened. She did not step back, merely turned slightly so they stood side by side, facing the horizon like observers rather than adversaries. For a moment, Jonah forgot to measure his words, forgot the careful mental filters drilled into him by command. He felt suspended between two versions of himself, the trained envoy and the man reacting honestly to something new. The balance was precarious, yet strangely steady, as though the ground beneath him had shifted to meet his weight. He wondered if she felt it too. "My name is Salith," she said, the syllables resonating with a measured cadence. The translator rendered it cleanly, but Jonah sensed layers beneath the sound, tonal markers his ears could not yet grasp. "I am designated leader for this convergence, responsible for outcomes that extend beyond this field." The statement carried no pride, only obligation, and Jonah recognized the familiar burden. "I'm Jonah Hale," he replied, voice quieter than he intended, human envoy, systems analyst, reluctant optimist. The last words slipped out before restraint returned, earning him a flicker of amusement in her eyes. She inclined her head again, acknowledging both his role and his honesty. They walked together along the chamber's edge, where the stone met open air. Below, rows of tents and equipment stretched outward, alien and human sections arranged with deliberate symmetry. Jonah noticed how Salith's pace adjusted subtly to his, neither leading nor following. It felt like a negotiation conducted without words, each step a shared decision. "You reacted strongly when you saw me," she said, tone observational rather than accusatory. "In my culture, such reactions are often bound to danger or alliance." Jonah considered that, aware of how thin the line between those concepts could be. "I didn't know what it meant," he admitted, watching the flags ripple in the evening wind. Humans don't always trust first impressions, especially ones that feel overwhelming. Salith's gaze followed his to the distant encampment, thoughtful. "We train from youth to recognize resonance," she said. "When two minds align without intent, it is not coincidence. It is signal." The word settled heavily between them, reframing his experience in terms he had not considered. Jonah felt both exposed and oddly validated. As they spoke, Jonah became aware of subtle shifts around them, Small movements at the edge of perception. Drones hovered farther back than protocol demanded, giving space without abandoning oversight. Alien aides paused their work when Salith passed, eyes lowering briefly in respect. Human personnel did the same, though their reactions carried curiosity alongside discipline. Jonah realized that every gesture here would ripple outward, interpreted and reinterpreted by both sides. He straightened slightly, conscious of representing more than himself. Salith seemed to sense the change, her expression softening. "You are calculating," she observed. "It is admirable, but unnecessary in this moment." Jonah exhaled slowly, tension easing from his shoulders. "I don't know how to stop," he said, a trace of self-awareness edging his tone. Her lips curved again, that almost smile returning. "Then we will account for it," she replied, as if it were the simplest solution. The acceptance felt more disarming than any challenge. They reached a quiet alcove where the stone rose higher, blocking most external noise. Here, the air felt cooler, carrying a faint mineral scent. Salith paused, turning fully toward him, attention narrowing with deliberate focus. "There are concerns among my council," she said. "They fear humans act from impulse, that emotional responses override long-term stability." Jonah stiffened reflexively, old defensiveness rising before he could stop it. He had heard versions of this critique his entire career. Salith lifted a hand slightly, forestalling his reply. "I observed you," she continued. "In the moment of strongest reaction, you did not advance, did not withdraw, did not seek advantage." Her eyes searched his face, as if replaying that instant. "You acknowledged feeling without allowing it to dictate action." Jonah felt a quiet pride stir, tempered by humility. "That balance," she said, "is not weakness. It is discipline." The words landed with the weight of official judgment. Jonah found himself nodding, a slow acceptance replacing tension. "We struggle with that balance," he said. "Humans feel deeply, sometimes destructively, but we learn. Pain teaches us restraint." Salith considered this, head tilting slightly in a gesture that suggested curiosity rather than doubt. "In my species," she said, "emotion is not subdued. It is integrated." The concept intrigued Jonah, challenging assumptions he had carried unconsciously. "What happens when integration fails?" he asked, "when emotion overwhelms reason?" Her gaze drifted briefly, unfocusing as if touching distant memory. "Then we rely on others to restore equilibrium," she said. "No mind stands alone." The statement resonated unexpectedly, echoing human philosophies often ignored in practice. Jonah wondered how many conflicts could have been avoided if that principle had guided decisions. He sensed a convergence forming, not just of cultures, but of shared values discovered independently. The realization sent a quiet thrill through him. A distant signal chimed, soft but insistent, breaking the moment. Salith glanced toward the sound, expression tightening fractionally. "The council convenes," she said. "They will wish to assess you directly." Jonah felt the familiar tightening in his chest, anticipation and pressure colliding. He had faced tribunals before, but never one where his emotions were part of the evaluation. "I'll answer honestly," he said, meeting her gaze. "That is why I brought you," Salith replied. They moved together again, steps synchronized as they left the alcove. Jonah noticed how easily the rhythm formed, an unspoken coordination. As they approached the council chamber, the atmosphere shifted, heavy with expectation. Tall figures waited within, their forms partially obscured by ambient light. Jonah steadied his breathing, grounding himself in physical sensation. He reminded himself that honesty was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Inside, the chamber resonated with layered voices, a low hum of communication. The council members regarded him with eyes that reflected light differently, each gaze carrying distinct intensity. Salith stepped forward, her presence subtly recalibrating the room's energy. "This is Jonah Hale," she announced, as perceived. The phrasing caught Jonah's attention, emphasizing observation over assumption. Questions followed, not rapid fire, but deliberate, probing reasoning and intent. Jonah answered with care, resisting the urge to polish his responses. As the exchange unfolded, he sensed Salatha's attention brushing his awareness intermittently. Not intrusive, but supportive, as if reinforcing his composure. When he admitted uncertainty, the room did not react with disdain, but interest. Human vulnerability, framed as data rather than deficiency, shifted the dynamic. Jonah felt something unlock within him, a permission he had not realized he needed. By the time the council dismissed them, tension had eased into cautious approval. Outside, the sky had deepened to indigo. They stood again in the open air, silence settling comfortably. "You did well," Salath said, the words carrying quiet conviction. Jonah released a breath he had not realized he was holding. "I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted. She regarded him steadily. "You did it because you chose alignment over advantage," she replied. "In the coming cycles, that choice will be tested." Jonah felt the weight of her words, aware that this was only the beginning. Conflicts would arise, misunderstandings sharpened by fear and history. Yet beneath it all, a thread of connection had been woven, fragile but resilient. He looked out over the encampment, imagining futures branching from this moment. For the first time since arriving, he felt something like hope grounded in realism. Salath remained beside him, presence steady, gaze forward. Together, they faced what came next, not as symbols, but as individuals willing to listen. The council chamber emptied in layered waves of sound and motion, leaving Jonah with the aftertaste of scrutiny clinging to his thoughts. He walked beside Salath through corridors that curved gently, architecture guiding rather than confining. The soft illumination responded to their presence, brightening and dimming with an intelligence that felt attentive. Jonah's mind replayed every answer he had given, measuring tone and implication long after the moment had passed. He felt the familiar pull of self-analysis, yet something about Salatha's calm proximity steadied it. Where doubt usually spiraled, it settled instead into cautious readiness. He realized he was not bracing for judgment, but for consequence. They entered a quieter passage, the distant hum of activity fading behind layered stone. Salath slowed, then stopped, turning toward him with an expression that held both resolve and restraint. "The council sensed alignment," she said, voice low enough that the translator barely stirred. "They also sensed potential volatility." Jonah let out a dry breath, unsurprised by the assessment. "That's fair," he said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Humans have a history of turning potential into disaster when fear gets involved." Her gaze did not waver, but he noticed a subtle tightening around her eyes. "Fear is not unique to your species," she replied. "What differs is how it is permitted to act." Jonah considered the words, thinking of Earth's long record of reactionary decisions. "We don't always give ourselves time," he said. "Sometimes we confuse urgency with necessity." The admission felt heavier spoken aloud, yet also clarifying. They resumed walking, steps falling into that shared rhythm again. Jonah became aware of a shift in his own posture, shoulders less rigid, stride more fluid. He wondered when exactly that change had occurred, and whether it was reversible. "You noticed immediately," he said, glancing at her. "When we met, you knew what I was feeling." Salath inclined her head slightly. "Yes," she said, "and I knew what it would mean." The certainty in her tone sent a ripple through him. "Meaning what?" he asked, careful to keep his voice even. "That you would be tested," she replied. "Not by us alone, but by your own people." Jonah's jaw tightened as images of political pressure and command directives flashed through his mind. Human leadership rarely tolerated variables it could not quantify. "And you," he asked, "what does it mean for you?" They reached an observation gallery overlooking both encampments. Night had fully settled, lights dotting the ground like constellations brought down to earth. Salath rested her hands lightly on the railing, gaze distant yet focused. "It means my judgment will be questioned," she said. "That I will be required to justify trust where caution would be easier." Jonah felt an unexpected swell of responsibility, heavier than any official mandate. I didn't ask for that, he said quietly. She turned then, meeting his eyes directly. Neither did I, she replied. The shared acknowledgement hung between them, stripping away formality. Jonah found himself nodding, a silent pact forming without ceremony. If this goes wrong, he said, it won't just be on you. Her expression softened, something like approval flickering through it. Shared risk, she said, is the foundation of alliance. A message chimed softly from Jonah's wrist console, the human signal jarringly plain here. He glanced down, reading the brief directive from his command. They wanted a preliminary report, immediate impressions, risk evaluation. Jonah felt irritation spark, quickly tempered by understanding. Earth feared what it could not yet categorize. I'm supposed to summarize you, he said, a hint of irony in his tone. Saletha's lips curved faintly. Then speak accurately, she said. Jonah considered that, fingers hovering over the console. Accuracy had rarely been the goal of such reports, but he felt compelled now. He began typing, choosing words that reflected complexity rather than threat. As he worked, he sensed Saleth watching, not the text itself, but him. The awareness sharpened his resolve, steadying his phrasing. When he finished, he did not feel relief, but alignment. They remained there in companionable silence, watching movement below. Jonah noticed small interactions between alien and human personnel, tentative but present. Engineers shared tools, guards exchanged nods, curiosity edging out suspicion. These moments, Jonah said, gesturing downward, they matter more than treaties. Saleth followed his gaze. Agreed, she said. Cohesion begins in observation, not declaration. A subtle shift in the air signaled another presence approaching. An aide stopped a respectful distance away, posture conveying urgency without intrusion. Saleth listened briefly, then dismissed them with a quiet gesture. There is disagreement forming, she said once they were alone again. Some of my council believe humans are attempting emotional leverage through you. Jonah's brows drew together, frustration flaring. I didn't plan this, he said. I know, Saleth replied calmly. Intent and effect are not always aligned. Jonah exhaled, grounding himself again. So what happens now, he asked. Her eyes searched his face, as if measuring something new. We proceed, she said. With transparency, even when it is uncomfortable. They moved back toward the inner chambers, the path familiar now. Jonah felt the fatigue of sustained attention settling into his muscles. Yet beneath it, a current of purpose kept him upright. He realized he was no longer thinking in terms of mission duration or extraction windows. This was not a temporary assignment. It was a pivot point, one that would reshape trajectories on both sides. The thought steadied rather than frightened him. Inside a smaller meeting space, they paused again. Here, the walls absorbed sound completely, creating a cocoon of quiet. Saleth faced him, expression serious. There will be pressure placed upon you, she said. To retract, to deny, to reframe what you felt as error. Jonah nodded slowly. I know, he said. And will you, she asked, comply? The question was direct, unadorned, impossible to deflect. Jonah felt the weight of it settle fully now. He thought of Earth's history, of missed chances and hard lessons learned too late. He thought of the moment the transport doors opened, and something irreversible shifted. No, he said simply. I won't. Saleth studied him for a long moment, then inclined her head. Then we are aligned, she said. The words carried neither triumph nor relief, only acknowledgement. Jonah felt something ease inside him, a tension he had not recognized until it released. Outside the room, conversations continued, plans forming and reforming. Inside, a quieter certainty took hold. They would move forward, not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. Pressure arrived quietly, not as confrontation but as calibration, subtle adjustments meant to steer Jonah without appearing to touch him. It came in revised schedules, in reassigned liaisons, in carefully worded messages from Earth that praised cooperation while tightening oversight. Jonah felt it as a narrowing corridor, choices still present but angled toward predetermined outcomes. Salith noticed as well, her attention sharpening whenever a new constraint appeared. They spoke less in formal settings, not from distance, but from shared understanding of how visibility altered intent. Instead, they found moments at the margins, where honesty could still breathe. Those moments became anchors. The first fracture surfaced during a joint logistics briefing, meant to be routine. Human analysts projected risk matrices, color-coded probabilities scrolling across shared displays. Alien strategists responded with relational models, mapping outcomes through trust gradients rather than thresholds. Jonah watched misunderstanding bloom in real time, each side interpreting caution as criticism. When a human officer suggested limiting alien access to shared infrastructure, the room chilled perceptibly. Salith did not react immediately, but Jonah felt the shift like a pressure change. He cleared his throat, breaking protocol before doubt could stop him. "We're treating uncertainty as threat," Jonah said, voice steady despite the eyes turning toward him. "That's a habit, not a necessity." The room stilled, tension sharpening rather than easing. He continued, framing the thought carefully, grounding it in shared goals rather than ideology. "We want stability. So do they. Different tools don't mean opposing intent." Silence followed, long enough to feel dangerous. Then Salith spoke, her tone measured but firm. "Restriction without cause erodes trust faster than any error," she said. The translator carried her words cleanly, stripping none of their weight. Several council members inclined their heads in agreement, while human officers exchanged guarded looks. Jonah felt the moment tip, balance precarious. He met Salith's gaze briefly, a silent confirmation passing between them. This was one of those tests she had warned him about. Neither of them stepped back. After the session dissolved into polite adjournment, Jonah was summoned by his command. The call came encrypted, flagged urgent, the tone unmistakably directive. He stood alone in his quarters as the familiar faces appeared, expressions controlled but intent. Questions came layered with concern, probing his judgment, his emotional state, his objectivity. Jonah answered honestly, refusing to reframe alignment as compromise. He felt the line he was walking narrow further with every response. When the call ended, he remained still, the silence heavy. Salith arrived without announcement, presence sensed rather than signaled. She did not comment on the call, but her eyes read the aftermath easily. "You are being repositioned," she said. Jonah nodded, exhaustion edging his voice. "They want me predictable," he replied. Her expression tightened, not in anger, but in resolve. "Predictability," she said, "is often mistaken for safety." They walked together again, the habit now ingrained, steps aligning without thought. Around them, joint patrols moved with growing ease, shared routines forming organically. Jonah took quiet comfort in that, evidence that connection could outpace suspicion. Yet above it all, pressure built, converging toward a decision point neither side could avoid. "The council will convene again," Salith said. "Not to assess, but to decide." Jonah's pulse quickened, anticipation sharpening into focus. The decision came framed as a proposal, its language carefully neutral. A shared governance node, staffed by representatives from both species, tasked with managing integration. On the surface, it was cooperation embodied. Beneath, Jonah sensed the stakes, authority redistributed, accountability exposed. Humans feared loss of control, aliens feared dilution of principle. Salith stood at the center of the debate, posture unyielding. She gestured for Jonah to speak. He did not prepare remarks, trusting instead the clarity forged through strain. "This isn't about who leads," he said. "It's about how we respond when assumptions fail." He spoke of adaptability, of learning curves measured in humility rather than dominance. He referenced mistakes humanity had survived only by acknowledging them. The room listened, some with skepticism, others with something like hope. When he finished, the silence felt different, receptive. Opposition surfaced, as expected, sharp and articulate. Questions pressed on enforcement, on safeguards, on the cost of misplaced trust. Jonah answered where he could, deferred where honesty demanded it. Salith supplemented with precision, outlining structures that balanced autonomy with accountability. Together, they formed a cadence, human intuition paired with alien integration. The rhythm held, even as debate intensified. By the end, no consensus emerged, but momentum had shifted. Afterward, they stood alone beneath a sky split by unfamiliar stars. Jonah felt the weight of near decision, muscles taut with unresolved energy. "I don't know if that was enough," he said. Salith regarded the horizon, expression thoughtful. "Enough is rarely immediate," she replied. "What matters is trajectory." The words settled, easing his tension slightly. That night, unrest flared at the periphery, not violent, but volatile. A misunderstanding between patrols escalated into raised voices and drawn stances. Jonah arrived with Salith before it could harden, presence alone shifting the dynamic. He spoke calmly, acknowledging fear on both sides without assigning blame. Salith reinforced with cultural context, reframing gestures before they calcified into offense. The standoff dissolved, leaving only residual tension and relief. Jonah realized then how easily it could have gone differently. Later, exhaustion finally caught up with him. He sat alone, hands resting on his knees, breathing measured. Salith joined him, not speaking at first, simply sharing the space. "You are changing the pattern," she said eventually. Jonah laughed softly, humor edged with fatigue. "It doesn't feel like change," he said. "It feels like holding the line." She turned to him then, eyes reflecting starlight. "Sometimes," she said, "holding the line is how change survives long enough to take shape." Jonah met her gaze, understanding deepening beyond words. Whatever the council decided, whatever Earth demanded, this alignment had already altered trajectories. He felt the weight of that responsibility settle fully now. Not as burden, but as purpose. They remained there, silent, steady, awaiting the final turn. Dawn arrived without ceremony, light bleeding over the horizon and washing the encampments in muted gold. Jonah stood where night had ended, feeling the temperature shift against his skin as if the planet itself were exhaling. He had slept little, not from anxiety alone but from the sense that something irreversible was already underway. Around him, preparations moved with quiet efficiency, footsteps measured, voices low. No alarms sounded, yet urgency threaded the air, subtle and insistent. This was the final day, whether anyone admitted it or not. He centered himself in the simple act of breathing. Salith joined him as the sun climbed, her presence as steady as ever. The light revealed faint patterns along her skin, luminous for a moment before fading. Jonah noticed them with a calm curiosity that surprised him. "You feel resolved," she said, observation gentle rather than probing. "I think I've accepted the cost," he replied. The words felt true, settling rather than weighing him down. She inclined her head, acknowledgement passing silently between them. The council convened beneath an open dome, sky visible through shifting panes. Representatives gathered in balanced arcs, human and alien positions interwoven by design. Jonah felt the geometry of it, symbolic and intentional, pressing meaning into the space. Salith took her place without ceremony, command radiating in restraint rather than force. Jonah stood beside her, not elevated, not hidden, exactly where he needed to be. The murmurs quieted as attention aligned. This was the moment trajectory became commitment. Arguments rose and fell with disciplined intensity. Concerns were voiced plainly now, stripped of diplomatic cushioning. Jonah listened, absorbing fear and hope in equal measure. He spoke only when necessary, choosing clarity over persuasion. When he did, his words carried the accumulated weight of days lived honestly. Salith answered where structure was needed, anchoring ideals to workable systems. Together, they held the space without dominating it. A final objection surfaced, sharp and unavoidable. What if trust failed? What if alignment fractured under strain? The question echoed, demanding more than reassurance. Jonah felt the familiar instinct to promise certainty, to soothe with confidence. Instead, he chose restraint. "Then we adapt," he said. "Failure isn't the absence of trust, it's the refusal to respond when trust is tested." The chamber fell into a contemplative hush. Jonah sensed the shift before it was spoken, a subtle recalibration. No one expected perfection anymore, only commitment to process. Salith met his gaze briefly, something like pride flickering there. The vote came without flourish, numbers aligning slowly but decisively. The shared node would be established. Not unanimously, but sufficiently. Applause did not follow, only a collective exhale. Jonah felt tension release from his shoulders, replaced by grounded awareness. This was not an ending, but it was a beginning with weight behind it. Salith addressed the assembly once more, voice steady. "Alignment does not erase difference," she said. "It gives difference room to coexist without collapse." The words settled into the chamber like a cornerstone. Afterward, the encampments shifted almost imperceptibly. Orders changed tone, routines adjusted, proximity normalized. Jonah walked among both sides, no longer feeling like an anomaly. He exchanged nods, brief words, small moments of shared purpose. These were the real measures of success, fragile and cumulative. Salith observed from a distance, allowing integration to breathe. Trust, once seated, needed space. Later, they stood again at the observation gallery, the view familiar yet altered. Jonah felt the fatigue finally arrive, heavy but earned. "It's done," he said, not celebratory, simply acknowledging. "For now," Salith replied. Her honesty drew a soft laugh from him. "I don't think humans would trust an ending without caveats," he said. She regarded him with quiet amusement. "You will return to your people," she said, not as question. "Yes," Jonah replied. "They'll want reports, frameworks, assurances." "And will you give them?" she asked. "Context," he said after a moment. "The rest they'll have to experience." Salith nodded, accepting the boundary. The moment of departure arrived without spectacle. Jonah stood at the transport ramp, the vessel humming softly behind him. Salith faced him, posture composed, gaze intent. This was the part without protocol, where language failed. "I noticed it instantly," she said, echoing the truth that had started everything. "And I still do." Jonah felt the words settle, warm and steady. "I don't know what this becomes," he said. "Neither do I," she replied. "But knowing is not a prerequisite for continuation." The insight struck deep, reframing uncertainty as invitation rather than threat. Jonah stepped closer, stopping just short of contact. "Then we continue," he said. Her near smile returned, luminous in restraint. The transport doors closed with a soft seal. As the vessel lifted, Jonah watched the encampments recede, lines blurring into pattern. He felt no rupture, only extension, as if something followed him without leaving its place. During the ascent, he began drafting his report, choosing words that honored complexity. He spoke of alignment, of shared risk, of learning curves shaped by empathy. He did not minimize challenges, nor did he inflate threat. Accuracy felt like the truest form of respect. Back on Earth, reactions ranged from cautious approval to thinly veiled alarm. Jonah faced them steadily, repeating truths without embellishment. He refused to reduce Salith to symbol or strategy. "She is a leader," he said simply. "And she noticed us because we were willing to be seen." The phrase lingered, unsettling some, resonating with others. Change rarely announced itself politely. Months passed, marked by steady exchange rather than crisis. The shared node functioned, imperfect but adaptive. Jonah continued as liaison, his role evolving with each iteration. He found himself teaching as often as learning, translating not language but intent. At night, he sometimes recalled the warmth of unfamiliar sunlight, the clarity of alien skies. Those memories grounded him, reminders of what alignment felt like. They kept him honest when politics blurred edges. On a return visit, the encampments felt less like borders and more like neighborhoods. Jonah walked freely, greeted by name on both sides. Salith met him where sky met stone, just as before. No declarations were needed, no reassurances offered. They spoke of systems, of people, of pressures yet to come. Their conversations held depth without urgency, trust without demand. This was what continuation looked like. As he prepared to leave again, Jonah paused at the threshold. He understood now that falling had not been weakness. It had been recognition, the mind responding to resonance before fear could intervene. Humanity's strength, he realized, was not dominance or certainty. It was the willingness to stand in uncertainty and choose connection anyway. Salith watched him with that same attentive calm. The moment held, complete without closure.